There we are. Welcome to the third installment of Finding Jesus, this project where we're looking to kind of grow in our understanding of who Jesus is by looking at different mediums of art, culture, just kind of looking at different handles for ways to have conversation about these kind of maybe higher truths or higher theological kind of strands of thought as it relates to Jesus, and then as it relates to us as people who are trying to faithfully follow Jesus. So I am Brad. I'm joined with by Mike and Kyle again. As we start out, wanted to just kind of ask you guys, as we're talking about literature, movies, anything that you guys are watching, reading these days.
I watched The Joker last night for the second time. Super well-made movie on the bleak side. And then I finished up. We finished up Fargo season 3 recently, which is kind of similar, I guess. pretty on the bleak side, but I love it. It's really good storytelling. Long format. Each season's a one-off, but it's really well done.
I don't think I mentioned this last time. Finished a book called Station 11, which is an interesting post-apocalyptic. The world is wiped out by a pandemic, interestingly enough. And I like those. There's a number of those books, if they're well done, they say a lot about life now, what's important and what we take for granted and so on. The other day, I watched a movie called My Scientology Movie, which I think was on Hulu. And it's this guy it's almost like he's pretending he's going through the motions of making a Scientology movie in order to get a reaction from the Church of Scientology. And that's the real movie. Because this movie is him making this movie, which I don't think ever got made, actually. And it wasn't really the point. So we'd interview these, the former church members or whatever. And then, of course, the church catches wind. And it's pretty well done. Sort of funny it's a Scientology movie that's a little more, it's a little unlike those sort of documentaries where what it's really like on the inside. Because it's actually the Church of Scientology kind of making its own mess, because, if they wouldn't have responded at all, there would be no movie whatsoever. But they're responding, vehemently denying all of these things. It makes it look like all of those things are true because they look completely unhinged. And so anyway, that was an interesting idea.
That is.
Like, he never really intended to make a movie about Scientology. He intended to make a movie about their response to him making a movie about Scientology.
That's fascinating.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So, what about you, Brad?
We're cool. Well, season 4 of The Crown just came out, so we're a couple episodes into that. Love, the way that they kind of, basically the way Crown works is every 2 seasons they switch the cast, and it's kind of a biopic of sorts through the life of Queen Elizabeth and her family and the royal family, and just kind of cataloging different kind of times from when she became queen to I would assume all the way up to modern day. We're not there yet, but it's interesting. I think because you see this tension between doing things based on tradition, the way that things have always been done, because that's how the royal family does it, with also wanting to be, relevant leaders for a modern, contemporary and modern people. And so just kind of the way that you just see that tension throughout it. So that's good. And then this weekend, actually, we were watching this time of year, we love kind of going through the Harry Potter movies, because this is kind of the time of the year when they were released. And so it just kind of feels like, it's November. It's time to watch Harry Potter.
Yep.
And so we just finished, we watched the 3rd and 4th movies this weekend. So good times.
We always do that either leading up to Halloween or Christmas, because it feels like both, or some level in between. We also just watched Little Women, the new one, and I had never had any experience with the book or the movies for Little Women, and it was pretty well done. I didn't really know what to expect, but it was super well acted.
Yeah, it's very well done. I mean, I'd read it and watched an earlier version at least. But this was different enough because they played a little with the chronology.
I wondered that. It seemed like they
made it. Yeah. Which made it interesting. Certainly you could, you obviously sort of knew it was going to happen broad brush, but it was quite well done, I thought. In fact, I thought, what's her name? Saoirse whatever her name is. Ronan. I thought she should have won Best Actress.
Yeah, she was real good, in
my opinion.
Yeah, it was kind of shut out of a lot of the big awards last year. But
anyway. It was good though.
Cool. Well, for kind of today's discussion, we are, our church, Calvary, we have a teaching series called Knowing Jesus, where we're looking chronologically at the life of Christ from kind of some of the prophecy leading up to his birth all the way through his death, resurrection, and ascension. And then we're in kind of this third sub-series, if you will. We looked at kind of his preparation time. We looked at some different encounters that he had with people. And then we're now in this kind of sub-series where we're looking at different miracles that Jesus performs. And so these are healings. He heals some people. He will kind of show his authority and his power over stormy waters and weather. And so we're kind of looking at how Jesus is kind of pushing back or kind of stepping into some of the fallen places of the natural order of things of creation, and how Jesus brings about restoration to those. And so kind of our big theme for this conversation is the restorative work of Christ. So that covers a lot. But kind of the view and focus, at least, is want to kind of pull from Colossians 1, verses 19 and 20. It says, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to him all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross." And so in Jesus, we see he is a restorative agent who is kind of stepping into the broken places of this world, broken places of creation, all of creation, broken places of humanity as well. And through what he has done on the cross, but then also through his miracles, through his ministry, and then ultimately through his church, and then, ultimately through his return, his second coming, he is working to fix and to restore all things. And so where we're at in this sub-series, we're going to see him do a bunch of miracles. And that's kind of the already not yet-ness of, what we talk about in theology, is that Jesus has done a work, but it's not yet completed. And we're kind of in this in between his first coming and his second coming, where we see different places, different points of the human experience, seeing and feeling and experiencing this restorative work, but it's not yet fully completed. And so it's kind of our topic for today. I want to ask you guys, when you hear the word restoration, when you hear the word restorative work, like what comes to your minds first and foremost?
Often I think of relationship, because we live in an imperfect world, and relationships are far from perfect. So I think when I hear that word initially, I think of, I'm also somebody who just wants people to get along. So that's where my mind goes, is restorative relationship.
Yeah, I tend to think of the, I guess, the biological, a forest fire goes through an area and it looks just completely charred, but if you drive through 2 or 3 years later, it's in the process of renewal. Or if you if you get sick and you are treated successfully, there's a recovery process and you're restored to health. The thing that sort of is the sort of thing we're talking about in the already not yet, because you're not really restored fully. You're going to die. Just to bring it down, just to bring this recording down to the bottom right at the beginning. I mean, you're restored to health. You feel better. You're better. You feel healthy. You're rejuvenated, but it's not a permanent final thing. You were sick and you felt horrible, and maybe you were, in the hospital or intensive care, and people did stuff and so on, and you recovered and you feel better. But it's, in 50 plus years or so, it's, there's a sense of it's restored, but there's a final restoration that has to happen still. And that's, Jesus's miracles are similar in, he raises Lazarus from the dead, but Lazarus dies later. He restores the withered man's hand, but that guy's not going to live forever. He's not going to be completely healthy every day of his life. It's one of these things that points to something. It's a real thing that points to something that isn't here yet.
Yeah, no, both those are so good, right? And one of the ways that I've Genesis 3 has been described to me in the past, right? You see all these different relationships that are destroyed, right? You see the relationship between Adam and Eve, so between humankind, right? You see the relationship that they have with God, and that's destroyed. You see the relationship that they have even with their own self, right? They start doubting, what is truth and what has God said, and we see, right, that brokenness and the restorative work that we need Jesus to do even within us. But you also see this relationship between mankind and creation, right? That relationship has been destroyed, and then creation even with itself. And so I do think, Kyle, that's a great point. Is the relational kind of component of work that we need Christ to do, to do work in. And then Mike, to your point of just the physical world and the physical creation, especially from a biological standpoint, even, both of those are so good. And so what Christ has done on the cross, and even before that, what Christ has done in his miracles and his relationships with people, and even reinterpreting the law, all of these things, this is the restorative work of Christ. And in kind of theological terms, right, we see a framework that we use a lot, this creation, fall, redemption, restoration, or if you like your covenant time, creation, rebellion, because it wasn't accidental, redemption and restoration. And Jesus is at work, and ultimately we're going to see all of those things. We see pictures of that in Revelation. We see pictures of that in the New Testament. But we live in the kind of this in between. And so I want to kind of get into our time as we like to kind of get into these discussions. It's one thing to kind of, I think, say, oh, hey, this is what this means, and this is where we see it. But I think it's another thing to feel that. In Romans 8:22, that Paul speaks, and he's speaking about creation. He's speaking about the whole earth groaning to be made right. He actually adds that humankind, humans, are part of this, and even the spirit is groaning too for whole creation to be restored. But verse 22 says, "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we await eagerly for adoption, as sons, the redemption of our bodies." And I think that what's particularly powerful when it comes to this conversation are places that we feel or we see. And I think that's one of the reasons that movies and poetry and pictures are so powerful, is because they allow us to, I think, feel the things that Paul is speaking about, using words here. And so, just kind of open dialogue. Anything that we, when you think of movies that you've watched or books that you've read, anything that you've seen on screen, how has that helped you kind of even come an awareness of what Jesus is doing, and just his work to restore all things?
Yeah, I think for me, one of my favorite movies is WALL-E. And I don't know that I'd call it post-apocalyptic. I guess it is, but it's an apocalypse brought on by man, right? The trash is so overwhelming that they've basically destroyed any chance of living on Earth still. So they're in spaceships, and the hero is this little robot who finds a single plant left and tries to get it to the people, and the captain discovers it, and it's a whole thing. But eventually they make it back, and there's just a ton realized, and there's a ton of hope in that. Like, beyond just now they can plant something to try and make an attempt to restore the Earth, but they, in the advancements of technology, they've had relationships broken. Like, everything's done through screens. Everything's done, like, they're talking to each other side by side through screens, which is not, like, I don't remember how long ago that movie came out, but that's not super different from what you can see today. So just the fact that now they have a chance to use their hands and to work together and to try and bring life back into the Earth and, in a sense, back into each other. I love the hope in that movie.
Yeah, when I first saw WALL-E, I went into it thinking, oh, it's another Pixar movie. This will be fun. It's an animated film. And then I just remember just like sitting and being like, oh my goodness, I see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies. An excellent love story also. So I'll say that. Somehow that fits. But two robots falling in love. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that for, the post-apocalyptic sort of, there's a sense of hope lost or despairing of the present, and hoping for some realization of some hope in the future, even if it's just a hint of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what, because both of those things are sort of what we see already a glimpse of when Jesus is healing people in a supernatural way. There's some sense of the recognition of some brokenness that's real and some hope towards something that is also real. And I think there's a lot of post-apocalyptic sort of movies have that sort of motif. Some of them are more depressing than others in that there really isn't necessarily a ton to hope for. I just thought of I don't know if there's a movie in a book, they're similar but not the same, called Children of Men. And it's a different sort of movie at least in the book, because everything seems fine except nobody can have any kids anymore. And so it's sort of like Western civilization just sort of comes to an end, and it's not really for anything or about anything. And people are just kind of living a comfortable life, and everyone's sort of self-focused. And then everyone realizes after a while, nobody's having any babies. And this sense of what are we here for is the pervading, like, if this is all we're here for, we might as well just let it peter out, until, of course, somebody does. Somebody gets pregnant, and that's sort of the ray of, we thought this was it, and now there's hope. And I think I think both of those things are. I think we're drawn to a lot. There's a lot of those movies because both of those things are sort of, if we really look, things are not the way they should be. And we long for something more. And then there's some hope of something coming that is better. And I thought of Children of Men only because it's not like there's zombies. There's not a pandemic. Nothing happens. Everyone's really comfortable. That's the problem. They're living comfortable, pointless lives, basically. And then they, for whatever reason, they just stop. They can't have kids anymore. And so, they're taking all these nature areas and making golf courses out of them, because why not? They're the last generation. It's just sort of that sort of thing where it's not that different than, it seems like we don't often think beyond our generation. And so it's sort of that idea of things are bad. I want to imagine a story in which there's some different age coming, because I think that's what we're wired for, right?
Yeah. Mike, you've been on an apocalyptic, like, hit I don't know the right word there.
Big old
parade.
I remember being in class.
There's a lot of them. I mean, it fascinates me because I'm old enough to remember when there weren't any hardly apocalyptic stories at all.
Yeah.
Planet of the Apes kind of came along, and well, that was interesting. How did we get to the point where, how did mankind get to the point where they, and I do think it says something about us in our culture that we don't have a lot of hope. We don't see where we're going. We've lost the story, lost the thread, and all of the post-apocalyptic stuff plays with this idea because, we believe in this bigger story, creation, fall, redemption, recreation. Once you lose that, then it's sort of like, what are we doing here? And you can easily see something coming. And I don't even think a lot of these things are predicting that something is coming. I mean, nobody's predicting zombies. You're just sort of reflecting on the current age by looking at it backwards from an apocalyptic point of view. Like, what happened to those people? And they're saying something about the life we're living now. So they're fascinating. And there's a lot of it. I mean, there's just a lot of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it's also an exploration of how far we can fall in a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. So the stuff I've seen, I like things that are hopeful. I'm okay to have things that aren't. But so a lot of the post-apocalyptic stuff I've seen has an air of hope to it. But it also definitely has the side of like the groups of people who are just going to do evil. It's like once something happens. So it's interesting that authors or filmmakers seem to want to really explore like the depth of darkness,
depravity
within man. Yeah.
Because you were talking about The Road earlier,
Yeah.
where that's a good example of that.
Yeah, father and son trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, and I think there's like renegades, there's cannibals, and in a sense, the father's just he sees the hope. On some level, he sees the hope of the world in his son, right? If I remember it right, and he's just trying to help him get to a place where he can make it.
Yeah, and it's similar to then the Children of Men, in which his son is the hope of the future. There are other children there, but so there's this idea of if we lost civilization, what are we really like, But then also, if we lost all of the things that occupy all of our time, what would we be living for? Like, what would life be for? And you have, on the one hand, people that will do anything just to survive. They'll eat their neighbor, literally in the road, just to survive. And that's sort of the whole of Walking Dead. The question is, who really is the Walking Dead? It's the zombies on the one hand, but it's really the people who will do anything to stay alive. And that's so that's thinking about us, like, what is our life for? That's sort of the question. I'm fascinated by all these secular views, because they're mostly not, they're not informed by a Christian view, but they're looking at, like, why are we here? What are we here for? Through the lens of the apocalyptic. Take everything away, what would you do? How would you live? Would you?
It makes me think of Station 11, which I just finished recently too. There's a line in that which I think is from Star Trek. Mike, you might remember that survival is not enough. And it's this idea that, like, the world is not as it was, but surviving isn't enough. There needs to be art. There needs to be, poetry and music and theater. And I just think that's a really beautiful part of that story. A group of people who see that, like, we can't just survive. We have to offer something to a hopeless world.
Yeah, that's a spiritual theme, because, if all we are is biology, well, then survival is enough if that's all we are. And if we're not, then we can't just survive. We have to do more. We have to have some meaning, some beauty.
Yeah, bringing it back to Wally, when the captain kind of realizes that they can do more, that they've not in a sense been lied to, but there can be a change. He says, I don't want to survive, I want to live. And that always has stuck out with me, because I think that rings true for my own life. How many times in my life have I felt like I'm just coasting and surviving versus living or offering more,
Yeah.
That's a really good thought. And I think it's one I'd never really thought about in relation to kind of even just this topic, because I don't know if this is a helpful framework or not, but like when it comes to the fall, when it comes to the natural order of things that has been tarnished, that's what we're surviving, right? We're surviving those things. And Jesus, what we see, what even just during his ministry, like he is offering true life, right? He's offering that opportunity to come. He's offering that opportunity to be healed, and then ultimately the hope that all of these things will be no more. So that's a really astute point, Kyle, that you brought there. I think there's a few other places. I think this theme, we see it in fantasy literature. It's easy to see it there, right? Fantasy. One of the, I think the brilliances of fantasy is that it allows you to create, almost a parallel universe, a parallel existence, and manipulate kind of different parts of that story to correspond to different, parts in our own story. And so I think of Hunger Games a lot when I think of kind of this, because you see all of the citizens of Panem, right? They are not thriving, right? They're not living life as they should. They are servants. They're subservient to the capital, and all of their resources, all of their economy, all of that is just to drive the capital. But you see these different, kind of grassroots, especially within Katniss, like these different actions to kind of drive back that, with the hope that life isn't going to be just this anymore. So I love that. There's another series I read a few years ago. It's a local author, teaches or taught at Westminster Christian Academy here in St. Louis, and the series was The Binding of the Blade. I'm thinking probably nobody else has actually read this series. I enjoyed it. It was
probably did somewhere.
Somebody, yes,
somebody listening
somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, no one listening.
Yeah.
But I bring it up not to create a common tie with someone else, but when I was reading this series, one of the main themes of it was this like hope for the renewal of all things. And the whole plot line, it was fairly predictable. I knew where it was going, but I wanted to keep reading. Like there was something that was drawing me in to keep reading it. And I found like my own faith being encouraged as I kind of felt this looked for the this hope for the renewal of all things, even in the world that I live. I actually emailed the author and I'm like, hey, just want to let you know, I just finished your series. I know it's probably a lot of work for you. I appreciate it. My faith was encouraged. If I was an author, I'd want to hear, that my writing is having an effect, on someone. But there was a real like palpable feeling in reading this, reading that story, that yes, God is up to something, and He is going to ultimately redeem and restore this world that we live in. But yeah, anything else that you guys, wanted or thinking about, or?
I think fantasy in general is good. That story what you're sharing there makes me think of the Circle trilogy. Have you guys ever read that? Ted Decker.
Oh yeah,
I have not.
It's been a while.
I mean, it's a long time ago, right?
I liked the trilogy, but it was really the third one when I feel like the restoration starts to happen that it felt like I had a similar experience. I think where his example of like baptism, I think, was actually drowning, and the way that he described it was a pretty overwhelming thing. And then just this group of people who sort of zombie-like, they were living, but just kind of dry without life, being restored was a pretty powerful read. But I do think you find that a ton in fantasy. One of my favorite fantasy series is The Wheel of Time. It's a 14-book epic saga.
It's a commitment.
Oh, it
sounds like a Wheel of Time, all right.
But it's similar to a lot, and that it's like the person similar to the Harry Potter character coming from nothing, that the hope of mankind rests on this one or two or however many people, and there's like the big bad, if you will, the Satan-like character who's trying to destroy everything. So that is a theme you see a whole lot in fantasy.
But I think even thinking about the miraculous, and I don't know if we'll talk about the miraculous after this Finding Jesus, what our following topics will be, but part of what goes with that is the belief that there is something more to the material world, that there is a spiritual reality. I think it's a stumbling block for lots of people to Christianity is this idea of the miraculous, and yet without it, you not only don't have really the Christian faith, you don't have the same Jesus, you don't really have the hope of a future coming in a future age, because that's really what the miraculous is, a sort of a preview of this future age that's coming, where everyone is healed, where no one dies. And so it's, Jesus perform miracles for a couple of reasons. One is to like preview this world and to show healing and restoration and different aspects of the kingdom, and also to show that he was the one to bring this about. And I think it's, for people who rule out the miraculous, they, in a sense, are ruling out the ability to really contemplate Christianity as it is meant to be contemplated. Because you can't, if you rule it out of hand, and you're not even really considering what Christianity actually claims to be. Because without the miraculous, there is no Christianity. It's the whole, creation is miraculous. Obviously, the resurrection is miraculous. And therefore everything is spiritual, is connected to this spiritual realm, which is connected to what we would call the miraculous. And I think that's the part. It's interesting that, we can, as a secular culture, contemplate, apocalyptic stories, or contemplate, fantasy or whatever. And yet when it comes to what we want to believe about life, some people say it's only what you can measure. But there's not a lot of transcendent importance that you can actually measure, like love, or hope, or life, or, what does that even mean? And so I think that's partly the maybe the religious authorities of the day wanted to have some sort of religion that they could be on top of and manage and have rules and so on. And that's one of the things Jesus is blowing up, is that reality is just way bigger than that. And there's way more to reality than you could ever contemplate. And to show you, I'm going to tell this guy to get up and carry his mat and walk out the door. I didn't see that coming, did you? And I think that's part of what's going on, is do we believe we live in a world that has miraculous things in it? And if we don't, it's a pretty dry place.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I mean, that's because the cross ultimately, right, is miraculous.
The central miracle, right?
That the Son of God has come to earth, and that this person can go and die on a cross, and that has some significance for me and for you and for people back then and people in the future and this whole world, even outside of human, right? And so, that's so good. It's what makes it. It's what makes the Jefferson Bible, right, so tragic, right? That you can have some semblance of religion without acknowledging the necessity, right, of the miraculous, and that Jesus was up to something. More
Thomas
than
Jefferson
just our
being somewhat of an early version of, I like Christianity, I like Jesus, but I don't believe in the miraculous. So he created a Bible with no miracles in it, or at least the New Testament, which, it's a lot less interesting. If Jesus isn't God and doesn't rise from the dead, didn't do the miracles, it's, I don't know. Is it like reading the story of Gandhi's life, maybe? Or, I mean, it's just not that. It's interesting, probably. Interesting, dude.
And something is missing, right? Like,
something essential.
Something is missing.
Yeah, that's kind of what, if you are going to reject the miraculous out of hand and then try to consider Christianity, you're not really considering Christianity. It's not Christianity anymore. It has to have, you have to have the miraculous. It's central to everything. And you take that away and you have a good teacher, but then you have to sort of take some of his teachings away, because that doesn't work anymore. And you have to take some of his actions away, because that must not have been true if there's no miraculous, and so on and so on. So I do think that's for me, I think we live in an enchanted reality to some degree. And
it's hard to maintain that, though. I think it's hard to maintain. I don't know about you guys, but
right.
the tension is we're on our way. So that's happened. Christ came and died, and um, the tension for me is the restoration can happen. Relationships can be restored to a certain degree, not perfectly. We can restore some things in nature, but the tension is that it just will never be realized while we're here, you know?
Right.
So it's like
Coming.
somebody might be, miracles happen now. I believe that somebody might be saved, but you know, being somebody who's lost family members in the recent years, there's also the side of it that some people aren't. And there's a difficult tension for me, even as a Christ follower, to see
right.
that.
Right. And that goes to what I was saying before. All of us ultimately aren't, in the sense of, you know, unless Christ returns, we're all going to die, because the final, you know, restoration is coming later. But the miraculous now gives us hope that there is a final restoration. And without it, then, you know, that's really bleak. You know?
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. I think it's easy to like lose the enchantment sometimes of what Christ did on the cross. You know, if you grew up in the church, you heard the story so many times. So it feels terrible admitting that. But I heard a story a pastor shared one time. I can't remember if it was John Piper or somebody else, but it was like a concentration camp where these guys were working. There's like 18 guys, and they had to bring their gear back in, and they were one shovel short. So the prison guards or whoever was getting all upset and demanding that somebody come forward who forgot to bring their gear back in. And this young, one of his teenager, young 20s, somebody volunteers that he forgot it, and they kill him. Well, they recount the things later, and all of them were there. They just miscounted, but somebody sacrificed himself for the sake of, well, he didn't want anybody else, any of the other guys, to die. And I remember hearing that and just being like blown away, because I was like, who does that? Well, Jesus did on a much grander scale, but it's easy sometimes to forget the miracle of that, or the grandness of that. I don't know if you guys relate to that, but
no, that's so good. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Jesus, he does the restorative work, and we see that on the cross. We see that in the hope for his return. And in the meantime, we as his church, as his people, right, we get to participate in that restorative work, whether it's relationships, whether it's mending relationships with people, whether it is being conscientious of the world that we live in and the effects that we have on it. And we do all of that with the hope, right, that Jesus is going to return, that he is going to come again, and that ultimately recreation is going to happen at that point. So anyway, well, hey, thank you for watching this, just kind of stepping into this conversation with us. The restorative work of Christ is expansive in that it covers all creation. It covers the whole entire cosmos, but it's also very narrow in that it speaks into and it plays in our own individual lives and our own individual moments. So anyway, it's been fun. If we will link to different notes, different movies, books, things that we referenced in the notes. And next month we will join you again. So see ya.
See ya.